what we're seeing is another attempt at, overthrowing the government. And it's very difficult for the United States authorities, even though they have denied it, it is very difficult for us to believe that there was no involvement from the U.S. This is also the same old story that we've seen, many years ago when we see the Bay of Pigs invasion. This is a bad copy of that. I mean, we see everything's in history. There's nothing new in Latin America. Everything has been written out. Everything's happened already. We just have different names in the years, but it's the same thing.
Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ramiro with Anticonquista. Anticonquista is an anti-imperialist media collective. Our content is produced by and for the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. And today we have the honor of being joined by Carlos Ron Martínez, who is the Deputy Foreign Minister for North American Affairs for the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Carlos, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Carlos, before anything else, how are you and your family doing, and how are people doing in Venezuela right now amid the pandemic, the coronavirus?
Well, look, I think, everybody has, of course, the concern as everywhere else because, it's a terrible disease that has hit us. Fortunately, Venezuela right now is one of the countries that has least been affected throughout the region. We took very early measures, even right before we had our first case. We started doing quarantines and this social distancing and so forth. And, these measures, I think, have helped, prevent the numbers. Last time I saw it, we were at 455 cases. Altogether, we have a population of 30 million people, so that's a very good number so far. And there's been some lives lost, of course, a number of 10. But people are trying to be disciplined, trying to maintain, the stay home and do. We suspended schoolwork, or actually not schoolwork, but classes. People are not going to classes. There's no gathering at theaters or mass gatherings of any sort. We're trying to we're trying to do work from home. Most of the cases, I myself, I try to avoid coming into the office, that often. I do it only on a need-to basis. But that way, we can maintain ourselves isolated as much as possible.
It's a much better response than the United States. Right now in Los Angeles, where I am at the moment in California, you have so many businesses that are closed down, but they're getting no help from the government. The government response here has been extremely horrible, based on the capitalist understanding of individualism. And it's been really inspiring to see the response by Venezuela that has saved so many lives. And I was looking at a map the other day of all the countries that were doing the best in Latin America. And I saw Venezuela was up there, Nicaragua, Cuba, obviously with sending medical brigades around the world. Venezuela is also helping people out around the world. And so I think it's really an eye-opener for those who have this illusion that the United States is the best force in the world, and a humble working people like Venezuela can step up to the plate.
Well, look, I think one of the things that this pandemic has brought on is a big debate again of the need for a public health system and what it means to have a network that you could respond and that healthcare is not something that is given only to whoever can afford it, but that is somehow distributed evenly to all the population. So one of the things that has helped us was precisely having a large community doctor program throughout the country, because what we're doing is that we have a system where all social programs that are tied to the government, there's a website where you come in and you check your benefits and so forth and how and whatever interaction you need to do. So we use that same system, to carry out a survey. And since very early on with the pandemic. So we're asking people through the survey, if you have symptoms, if you have been exposed, if you traveled anywhere where you could have, gotten it, if you met somebody or you got in touch with somebody who might carry a virus, if you have any, you feel anything peculiar. With that system, and we have around 19 million people that have already answered the survey, we were able to identify where we needed to go and look out for people that might be at risk. Having a network of community-based doctors allows you to, go to that community after you have the data and then find out if these people need more help, where you need to do the testing. And then that helps you do the tracing of who else could have been contaminated if we have a positive case and so forth. That has been a tremendous help in order to to be able to keep this under control. But it is difficult because, like you said, we are a country under U.S. sanctions. We are a country that has been limited, in several ways. I mean, it's very hard for us to buy the things that we need, the medical supplies that we need to face this, masks, things for the tests and everything. Because a lot of the people that sell are afraid that if they sell something to the Venezuelan state, to the government as such, they could be punished by the Treasury Department and so forth. When they feel that, when we find somebody that feels, well, we'll do it, then those people often can charge 2-3 times the price of what these things cost. And then even the payment is another problem because we are blocked by, financial transactions. So if I send you a check or a deposit, whatever, to buy some masks, then that's not going to go through the bank. So it's a very difficult problem.
Right.
And which we've solved through solidarity. So that's why it's very important to have this question, all these ideas, all these concepts. Because it has been through the solidarity of the Cubans that came in with a brigade, that came in with some, even medicine for the treatment. The solidarity of China that has come in with another group of experts to help us, look at how we can better deal with this. The solidarity of the Russians that have, sold us the kits for the test. See. And the multilateral organizations, World Health Organization, that has been the way Venezuela has been able to get these supplies in time that we can use for helping out the population. But what is important here, I think, is when you don't have a goal that is set for profit, then you could really, your priority starts becoming the people, and then you could really help people out.
That's exactly right. And I think I'm glad you mentioned the word profit because that takes us into what I really wanted to ask you about today, which is the ongoing attacks by U.S. imperialism that is based on profit, an empire based on the accumulation through destruction, right? The U.S. keeps wanting to invade countries around the world, impose its economy, impose its hegemony. And recently, we've seen mercenary attacks in Venezuela over the past few days. I think the last major one was on May 3rd in La Guaira. On Sunday, I know there have been a few more after that. Tell us what's going on right now with the U.S. mercenary attacks against Venezuela.
Well, look, let me start by contextualizing a little bit. Venezuela, we're we're doing a revolutionary process, a democratic revolutionary process that started, in 1999. Ever since we have had all special interests throughout the world that are interested in the oil reserves in Venezuela, but also that are interested in knocking down this political project as a model. We've been fought off for the last 20 years or so. So this is not something new. It's just that there's new expressions of it. But we've been fighting off this for, there was a coup against President Chavez in 2002. There was a oil lockout in 2003. And in more recent years, we had riots in 2014 and 2017 that were financed by the right wing, that were fascist. I mean, this Sunday is going to be one more anniversary of when a man called Orlando Figueres, who was a Chavista, just walking down the street during one of these protests by the right-wing conservative opposition, was set on fire. And personally, he was drenched in gasoline, and they lit him on fire. And people asking, well, why was this done? And say, well, he looked Chavista because he was an Afro-Venezuelan, and the color of his skin, the way he dressed, gave him off the impression that he was Chavista without even knowing if he was a militant or not or whatever. So this is a very cruel struggle between people that used to have privileges and people that are interested in maintaining their hands on Venezuela's riches against a popular democracy that is trying to survive. That being all said, like you said, the latest attack was something that happened on, like you said, on May 3rd. It was a raid coming from mercenaries that were organized in Colombia. Some of them were former Venezuelan military, people that defected from the military and went to Colombia to organize an attack there. But we also detained 2 U.S. citizens who had been part of special forces, Green Berets, who were part of this mission. You had, according to the press, and there was actual expression videos of this man called Jordan Goudreau, who was the owner of a security firm in the United States, who says he claims that he was hired, he had signed a contract with Juan Guaidó, the leader of the opposition here, in order to carry out this operation, which would entail coming into Venezuela, setting off, different violent attacks, terrorist attacks throughout the country, that it would eventually lead to the overthrow of the government. And if you read the contract, Washington Post published, the contract. He handed it over. He, made it public. If you read the contract that Goudreau signed with the opposition here, it's a complete violation of human rights, a complete violation of our Constitution, and it entails, the effective persecution of anybody tied to the government or the state of Venezuela if there was ever this coup d'état. So what we're seeing is another attempt at overthrowing the government. And it's very difficult for the United States authorities, even though they have denied it, it is very difficult for us to believe that there was no involvement from the U.S. because President Trump has been preaching himself that there's a military option for Venezuela that he's been considering. There's ties between this Goudreau person and part of his own security detail. But this is also the same old story that we've seen, many years ago when we see the Bay of Pigs invasion. This is a bad copy of that. I mean, we see everything is in history. There's nothing new in Latin America. Everything has been written out. Everything's happened already. We just have different names in the years, but it's the same thing. So there's a history. And it's funny because sometimes they try to erase that. Even President Obama, who many, also revere as different from President Trump, but let me say, the one who started the sanctions against Venezuela was President Obama. And President Obama always had this discourse when, he would come to the Inter-American or the Summit of the Americas in Trinidad. He keeps saying, well, I had nothing to do with the past. We are moving from here on. The past was before I was born. I'm not responsible for this. But, we value history in Latin America. And if we didn't, we have the same things repeating over and over again. So I think that, we're able to repel such aggressions and such attacks because we're conscious of our history and because we're, conscious that we need to defend our national sovereignty and that we need to defend our democratic process. This is the idea here was to, set off a wave of violence against Venezuela, against its authorities. In the last, 2 months, the U.S. government has launched what they've called the maximum pressure campaign, where we're living in something called a hybrid war, because, hybrid wars have different types of, it's not your conventional, guns and, the ships coming to the coast and the military, it's another type of war where you use diplomatic, it's a diplomatic war when you try to isolate a country, and have, they've been trying to do that at the Organization of American States or at the UN against us. You do have the economic warfare where, they block our financial transactions, like I just described. You have a form of even blocking loans and things from the ability for us to renegotiate our debt. All these things in order to surround us with all that types of different attacks. The U.S. said that they are in their maximum pressure campaign, and from late March and early April, they only three things that were key. An indictment against President Maduro by this Department of Justice, accusing him of being, a drug trafficker and having the main. All the government now is involved in drug trafficking. Conveniently, in the middle of the pandemic, they bring that out. Then they issued a plan, which was they said is a diplomatic tool that where Venezuela should agree to all political forces, but basically it's a capitulation of the president. They want the president to resign. And then they called for the largest military operation in the region that has happened since 1989 when Panama was invaded. So you have all these things coming together because the opposition, together with the interest in the United States that want to overthrow the Venezuelan government, believe that this is their now or never moment, because they see that in the middle of the pandemic, we're not going to be able to deal with a pandemic and a coup d'etat at the same time. So they feel, no, let's do all the aggressions that we could do at the same time, because this is the way they're going to fall. Fortunately, we've had the pandemic under control, and people's consciousness. I mean, one of the things that that saves us from all these troubles is that the Venezuelan people don't want to fight. The Venezuelan people don't, they just want to live in peace. Everybody from both sides, pro or against the government, people rather have all these disputes be solved at the election box, through the votes, and not through any sort of violence.
I'm so glad you mentioned the historical context, because just like you said, it's the same story playing out over and over again. For example, just a few days earlier was the anniversary of the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, and I'm glad you mentioned it. And people have even called this failed invasion the Bay of Piglets, because they were so incompetent at even doing their one basic job, which is a horrible job. And it showed the strength of the Bolivarian Revolution in the fact that you have a Afro-Venezuelan socialist fisherman area that came out and defended their people and celebrated and stood with the police and the armed forces. You would never see that here in the United States. If anything, in the past few days in the United States, police have been killing black people in the U.S. You know what I'm saying? And this is during a crisis. This is while we have the worst coronavirus cases in the world. And it just reminds you of the quote by Vladimir Lenin when he said that fascism is capitalism in decay. And that's what this reminds me of, because as we know, the U.S. empire, because it's imperialist, it's based on an anarchistic economic system like capitalism. It constantly needs to invade new markets, right? One of them being Venezuela. It wants to privatize its commodities and do away with it at the expense of the people. And it's just so reminiscent of what we've seen in the U.S. imperialism in the past. For example, with these mercenary groups, right? Like you have Goodrow and Silvercorp, these private security firms that are on the rise again. And that's very similar to what the U.S. economy was like during the Confederacy. There was a man named William Walker. He was from the South, and he invaded Nicaragua, I believe, in 1856. And he declared himself president. He went there, the arrogance, right? He was just like, I'm the new president, I'm the new leader. And similar to kind of like what Guaido is doing. But obviously this was like a white man from the US. And it's just like interesting to see how it's happening over and over and over again. And that's why it's so important for the young Latinos who are watching this to really understand our history, because it's playing on over and over. And just like you said, Carlos, the media, it's a hybrid warfare campaign. So they use the media as a way to distract our people. They have our people watching Univision, Telemundo, and all these worship celebrities instead of worshiping the working class people in places like Venezuela who are saving the planet from ecological destruction, from imperialism and war. And so that being said, what was Venezuela like before the Bolivarian Revolution? Because not much of that is ever mentioned in mainstream media. So what was it like? I know it was very different from what it's like now.
No, you definitely had a system where people didn't feel that they were politically represented. You have exclusions of high numbers of poverty, around the 70% of national poverty. And then again, that important factor. You had people that didn't feel that they were enfranchised, that they weren't, they didn't belong. You could sort of say, given that you're calling, you're the United States, you could sort of say, to use an example from history there, that what the Bolivarian Revolution meant for Venezuela in the sense of transformation is similar to a combination of what the New Deal and what the civil rights movement did in the United States, like both things at the same time. A big part of social programs, the idea that people had deserved certain access to social welfare and many other things that the state was responsible for, and also people that had never had the opportunity to have effective political participation, feeling that for the first time their vote was counted, that they really had a chance. This became not only a representative democracy. I mean, we don't just vote for people that are going to represent us. We are a direct, or more direct democracy in the sense that we are participatory, and we have spaces for our own interaction with the political system. And we talk about the protagonism of the individual because our transformation happens because we are part of that transformation. So, for example, if you have a housing project, well, people in the community will participate in the building and the repairing of the houses themselves, their own homes. It's not only somebody waiting for somebody to come from outside and do things for them. It's they taking things into their own hands and being part of that, and the government supporting that. Okay, so that builds, and this is what people don't understand, and why it's so difficult because of the misinformation campaign that you talked about. For a lot of people outside of Venezuela, it's very difficult to understand because they don't know that what this experience means and what it means to cherish what's your own. When you build the house yourself, when you are a part of it, then you put much more love into it. You put more effort. And then when somebody's going to come into, when a ship is going to attack you, you're going to come out and you're going to, do something about it because you feel belonging. And that's the feeling that people don't understand. People think here that, the Venezuelans just want to, the Venezuelans are dumb, the Venezuelans are, people that are, I don't know, brainwashed or something, and that we don't understand what's going on, and that we don't know that people are out to get our riches, and that people want to destroy our political model. We know what's going on. We have raised political consciousness, and what people are defending here is the right to, take our own destinies the way we decide.
And even in the US, the notion of the so-called American dream is false because, for example, my parents are immigrants, right? My parents are from Honduras. They immigrated from Honduras to New York, and eventually they bought a home in New York, but they're in thousands of dollars of debt that they're never going to pay back. The bank owns it. It's not theirs, right? In the US, it's like you get the illusion of freedom, of sovereignty, but it's built on fictitious lies. It's built on sand. And what I think is beautiful about Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution is that, like you said, people are willing to defend and die for something if it's the product of their own labor, and putting the needs of the labor ahead of anything else. And I think that's really, really cool.
I think that's key. I mean, if people felt included and felt that they were part of, this country began being their country, when this took place. So with this revolution. So I think that's what's made it most important for us. So again, there are different perspectives, but I think what's important about this pandemic and this current situation is that we get to question those values and realize, what we believe is more human, more humane.
And when we talk about U.S. imperialism in Latin America, especially against Venezuela, part of it is economic, right? The need for expansion of capital. The other part is, like you mentioned, policies like sanctions, like locking up bank accounts, stealing money. What kind of attacks have the Venezuelan people experienced by U.S. imperialism since the Bolivarian Revolution of 1999?
All types of attacks, like we said, there was this on the diplomatic front, on the economic as a blockade for itself. I mean, recently we had about $40 million from a Citibank account, or account that the Venezuelan central bank had in Citibank. The money was taken out of the account and put into the Federal Reserve without our consent or anything. It's just it's really theft. We Citgo, which is a Venezuelan-owned company that is there in the United States, was pretty much taken over by U.S. allies, and they basically stopped the repatriation of funds that would usually go to buying of different things, food supplies, medicine, industry parts, all these things. So that got cut off as well. So it's part of the aggression. And like I said, it really is theft because, it's something that belonged to the people of Venezuela. And all of a sudden we got cut off because of the U.S. sanctions.
It's horrible. I mean, I compare it to the same way, for example, in the United States, one of the fastest growing populations in prison are single mothers who live in poverty. And I compare it to the US government punishing a single mother who's trying to feed her kid, even though she can't pay her bills because they've closed her bank account and they've made it impossible for her to be able to survive and do the things she needs to do. And so the U.S. state only responds not with resources, not with addressing the contradiction of poverty, of war, but of violence, of aggression. And we're seeing this with companies like Silvercorp, where you have the privatization of the military-industrial complex in the U.S., and these 21st century mercenaries, these 21st century William Walkers are going in and invading our countries and hurting our people.
That's what it never makes sense when they said that they are doing these measures because they care about the Venezuelan people. Because if they really cared about the situation of Venezuelan people, they wouldn't do things that would that harm our ability to bring things into the country. I mean, we are mainly an oil producing country still, so that means that most of the things that we use on an everyday basis we have to import. So if we are cut off from the oil import exporting business, then we're basically left. It's like I'll tell you, okay, you have money in the bank, but you won't be able to take it out. Or cut your debit card off, and so it's more or less the same thing. So there is no concern for the people of Venezuela. Even if you had a dispute with a certain political leader or president, whatever, there's no way that international law allows you to punish a whole population. And what's going on here is collective punishment on all the population of Venezuela, because everybody here suffers the same thing, the same effects. If you delay, for example, a vaccination campaign because the payment hasn't come out to buy the vaccines, the payment stays 2 months in the bank. Well, the bank analysts decide whether its money is clean or it's not clean, or where it comes from, whatever. You've wasted 2 months. That could mean the spread of a disease because you weren't able to vaccinate on time. So this is the type of aggression that we're suffering, and those are real consequences, that affect people.
Unfortunately, a lot of times in mainstream media, what you see is that once these sanctions and imperialist policies affect Venezuela, then they blame all of that on socialism, right? You see all these articles that come out that are like, you see, this is why socialism has never worked, blah, blah, blah. It's the same line over and over again. But then anyone who's reading that can also ask, like, what about capitalism in the US right now? I've seen way more homeless people than ever before. I see people every day going out and living on the street because they've been kicked out, they're not able to pay for rent. You have more children who are being cut off from school. You have just rising poverty across the United States. And even in the capitalist countries in Latin America, like in neighboring Colombia and also in Haiti, in Honduras, and República Dominicana, you have some of the highest levels of poverty and inequality in the region compared to Venezuela. And it's just it's so infuriating that they attack Venezuela even though it's doing as good of a job as it can at serving its people, and they say that socialism is never going to work and capitalism is the best system. What do you think about that?
No, I believe that again, it's an ideological fight because they need to put down anything that would question the model over there. And I think that is why you see such why socialism has become such an important word in U.S. politics in the last couple of years. It actually had been a very important word before the Cold War. I mean, a lot of the things that a lot of the social gains or the rights that people enjoy in the United States were the product of the mobilizations of socialists before throughout history. Labor unions achieved the 8-hour workday and things of the sort. It's an ideological discussion, but at the end of the day, there's a fear that capital won't be able to concentrate as much if you start taking care of people. So people that already have a lot of money, they just want to keep having a lot more money. But at the same time, this is good because now that these debates are coming through, now that we have this way of communications, that we have new abilities to talk to people, then I think it's very good that these discussions again become important, and we lay them out and we try them till the end, and say, well, what is it that we really consider is important? Where are people getting more benefits? What is the system where people are really taken care of? And that's the question you should ask. We've never we've never said to anyone to, do things the way we do. Our formula works for Venezuela. Our formula doesn't have to work for anybody else. But I think that it is important that everybody finds the formula that really works for their own people, and that's what the task is.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach because socialism is like a tool that can be used and adjusted depending on the location. Like in China, they have socialism with Chinese characteristics. In Vietnam, they have, inspired by Ho Chi Minh, they've developed their own model. In Venezuela and Cuba, etc. And I think people really need to keep that in mind. And kind of wrapping up our conversation here in terms of solidarity from the U.S. and the diaspora. One of the biggest issues that we have as Anticonquista, as an anti-imperialist Latino youth communist group, is really agitating and organizing people like myself, young Latinos in the U.S., to show solidarity with Venezuela. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, what you see is that because mainstream media has fed these lies about, like corruption and bureaucracy and all this nonsense about Venezuela, people will then say, well, both capitalism and socialism are bad. Like, we want our own like autonomy, and it's more of a trend of kind of like anarchism where they recognize the problems that are going on, but they're against any sort of collective organized action, that involves a state and voting and stuff like that. What message do you have for those people who maybe like they understand like, okay, what the U.S. is doing is bad, but they're not yet ready to be in solidarity with people in Venezuela. Like, what message do you have for people that?
Yeah, well, you have to think that I think it's two issues there. Um, First of all, I think it's important to allow the Venezuelan people to make their own decisions. It's not for the U.S. or it's not for anybody else to decide what Venezuela's future is. It's for Venezuelans to decide. So and that's very important, because you don't have to agree. You don't have to be a socialist to or you don't have to agree with my view of Venezuela, but you at least have to respect the fact that it is up to us Venezuelans to decide it, for us to carry our elections. The problem is that today as we speak, the United States has meddled so much into Venezuelan politics, backing specific groups here of the opposition, playing into altering the situation with the sanctions and all that. That this is not a place where Venezuelans can decide without the United States, pressuring. And that's something that people in the United States need to say, look, if the Venezuelans want to be capitalist or socialist, it's their problem. Let them do that. That's the first thing I would say. The other thing I would say for people that want to look at socialism and think is that, we are in the struggle because we live in a world which is dominated by capitalism. So we're trying to do projects or new political projects that are going to come into conflict with that. And all these projects are going to have contradictions. We can't avoid them because it's something, and like Gramsci said, when something that's dying and something that's being born at the same time, the dying doesn't finish dying, and the one that's being born doesn't, it's not ready to be grown yet. So we have that moment. We're at that conjuncture where these things are clashing, and we're going to have contradictions. We're not, nobody can expect that everything is going to be pure and there's not going to be any mistakes. On the contrary, we're going to find contradictions, and we have to iron them out. We have to, but for that we need unity, and we need objectives. We need clear objectives. We need to defend, a society that works for the working class, or works for the common person, that respects human dignity. So that has to be our horizon. And along the way, again, there's going to be contradictions. I mean, there's contradictions on the way Venezuela, like I just said, our economic system, our economic policy, we're all depending on oil, and then there's some people say, oh, we think the oil industry is terrible because it pollutes, and then, we want climate, defend. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we know that there's a contradiction. But the way that the organization of labor was established, basically forced us into only having that. So we need to have a transformation. And in the way, we start transforming, but that's not something that happens overnight. So we're going to fall into the contradiction that we need to extract oil, so that with the money from the oil, we could pay for the social programs that, the people that were left out all this time. So you have to understand, a transformation implies contradictions, implies difficulties. But you need to have a clear objective, and that's what's important. And the objective here is a more democratic society, a more just society, a society that has the human being as its center and not profit, a society that thinks collectively, and the things that we need to have this collective thought, because otherwise we're going to run out of the planet. We're going to waste all our resources. So it's a struggle, and yes, sometimes it's not easy, but if we keep the objective set, we'll eventually overcome these contradictions.
The United States, aside from being the main aggressor against Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua and other countries, it's also home to one of the largest Latin American diaspora populations in the world, right? There's literally millions of Latinos from all over Latin America, Nuestra America, who live in the United States. And we have people like me, myself, my family, immigrants who came to the United States. I believe it's important that we stand in solidarity with Venezuela against aggression. And so I wanted to ask you, what message do you have for the Latino community of the United States in regards to these imperialist attacks against Venezuela that we're seeing taking place now?
Well, I think it's important to maintain class solidarity. And I think, most of the Latino community in the United States, working class community that is struggling also, for different reasons. I mean, I think that it's important to think that we're all part of the same struggle. I mean, we are fighting off the people that discriminate against us. A lot of the reasons that Venezuela is not left alone is because there's a strong racist view that we are not capable of taking ourselves, care of ourselves, and we're not capable of taking care of our own wealth, oil wealth, and so forth. So, we fight racism the same way. We fight, capitalism, exploitation the same way. So I think, there's a lot of more things in common. And we come from the same, cultural background and the same, one part of the other. I mean, we have the same roots, the same history. So we have to understand that this is the same struggle for all of us. Because at the end of the day, what we want, the best thing would be that we have a society where people don't have to migrate, that people were, be able to live in fair conditions in their own country. I mean, that's something that we struggle with every day. And the harder the sanctions are, the more people that have seen the need or have taken the choice of emigrating from Venezuela as well. So this is something that we definitely understand, and this is something but we need to fight it off here, so that we can. Make sure that we transform our societies here, and there's a lot of things that the Hispanic and Latino community can do in the United States by raising consciousness of the issues here, raising consciousness of how poverty is felt in Latin America, how exploitation from U.S. corporations affects the lives of people in Latin America. It's important for that to take place. So the Latino community is that bridge where we can come to understanding with the U.S.
That's exactly what I'm hoping for. Carlos, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate having you on. Again, we spoke with Carlos Ron Martínez, who is the Deputy Foreign Minister for North American Affairs for the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. They recently have been going through U.S. aggression, mercenary attacks, and so we want to extend our solidarity with the people of Venezuela in name of Anticonquista. Carlos Ron Martínez, thank you so much, and have a great day and be safe. Take care.
Thank you, my friend. Take care.